Birth order and sibling dynamics, what every parent would benefit from hearing. In the early days, my children fought a lot. They fought over toys, over my attention. They were so jealous with each other. I am so proud that now that they're going on 12 and 15, they have now come to respect each other. That bond between siblings lasts a lifetime, and in today's video, we explore these 3 topics. Part 1, we speak about the contrast between siblings despite same parents. In the second part, you will hear about how your birth order determines your life and how you parent your children. Part 3 is the very juicy topic of what to do when siblings fight. Enjoy this podcast. My name is Annette, and I created this Effortless Parenting podcast because I believe that you deserve a calmer home. Today's guest is Elaine Parker, and we'll speak a little bit about birth order and siblings and dynamics in families. So you're an Adlerian counsellor and a supervisor, and you were a school counsellor for over 8 years. So you've got loads of experience with children and young adults, and you'll be well informed in what we speak about today. And you work with couples and with families. And you give trainings in the Adlerian psychology trainings based in Wales. And in your former life, which I find so fascinating, I met you in person earlier last year, you're a musician. So that's what you went to university for. So to introduce yourself, maybe you can share where you're from and how you got interested in Alfred Adler, who all the teachings, the parenting and the teacher trainings we talk about on this channel are about. And then maybe one aspect, how his teachings have enriched your life.
Yes, thank you. Well, just a very brief introduction to me. I'm an eldest, as we're talking about birth order. I'm an eldest of 5. I was born in 1957. I'm really old. And when I was 5, we moved to France. I was born in Scotland. And when I was 5, we moved to France, and I stayed there until I was 16, then came back to the UK, Scotland, and then went to college in Cambridge. And then, was active as a musician, singing, teaching in Cambridge and London, and sang in a big choir in London that we travelled all over the world, which was wonderful. Then we moved to Wales. And when I moved to Wales, I'd already done a couple of psychology trainings, and I thought, really, we knew nobody when we moved here, so I thought one good way to get to know people would be to maybe do a counselling course. So I looked in the paper in the January. We moved in December. In January, free counselling course. So free for people. It was 10-week introduction. So I enrolled in that, and it was wonderful because the trainer was Linda Edwards, who is an Adlerian and trained in London with people like Zonstergaard. And she was just an amazingly inspiring teacher. And the course was not fully Adlerian. There were only 2 evenings on Adler. But as soon as I heard about Adler, it just blew me away. It explained everything. About my family dynamics, about being an eldest, and my personality and my temperament. All of those things became so clear in those 2 evenings. And immediately I just thought, this is it. I've come home. I've come home. This is the psychology that means a lot to me. So I signed up to do the certificate, which started in September 2004. And that was the start of my training. So I qualified in 2008, having done 3 years with a gap in between, and never looked back. Absolutely love Adler. I've come to believe I've become more Adlerian as I go on. His ideas seem to be very simple, but they are deep. And there are layers and layers and layers and layers. And I've had so many amazing Adlerian colleagues who've taught and inspired me. And also I early on, because I had a lot of teaching experiences, I started teaching Adler at a basic level, and now I'm teaching at supervision level. And so I feel as though I'm kind of maturing as an Adlerian, getting there.
Right.
So that's really in a nutshell what it
And
is.
what is something like when you say I have come home, when I heard about Adler, I had that same feeling. I started with Rudolf Dreikurs, who was a junior colleague. He explained Adler to me in a way of how we can adapt that to parenting, and he's done a lot of on marriage counseling. When you say you've come home to Adler, what is one thing that you say, wow, I couldn't live without this, knowing this anymore, or
Yes. Well, I think actually it's understanding the formation of personality in that early childhood. Adler said that we have everything in place in terms of our personality by the age of 5. Dreiker said by the age of 7. So 5 to 7, I think, is useful. And there are so many aspects to this that were meaningful to me. So the birth order, very important, and the relationship between the different siblings, and also the parenting styles, what our parents were like, and how they brought us up and how they educated us to be part of a family, all of those, how they modeled being a parent, what was useful, what was less useful, understanding how those dynamics impacted on me and the choices I made. And I think also understanding that we create ourselves. It's not cause and effect. Children look around and they make decisions based on not always the full experience, but that they have feelings and they make a decision based on their experience currently and their feelings and what they might do about it. So that really helped me understand, and also understand how different all 5 of us are, my siblings and me. We are so different one from the other. And that always puzzled me. And of course, Adler gave the explanation for that.
And I want to dive into that with my first question. That's a lovely transition. And, so when parents come to me, so I work as a parent educator, and when parents come to me, they sit in front of me and often in despair say, I'm parenting my children all the same and they're so different. What am I doing wrong? Or what can I do differently, So I would love to hear a bit more about that, which you were already starting to explain, Elaine.
Well, yes, I think there are certain things that are foundations that are the same. So, for example, the kind of the discipline within a family, the rules, what we are allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do, how we respect each other, all of those things. But also understanding that our children will be different from each other and will have different psychological and emotional needs. So it's not about preferring one over the other or being softer with one or softer with the other, but children have different personalities. They're not little cookie cutter children, like those garlands you see when you cut out the shape of children. They're not like that. They're not all the same. And I think also building strong relationships with each child individually as well. Giving children love as well as discipline. And when we say discipline, positive discipline, as you know, is about really, it's about encouragement. It's about understanding consequences of behavior. It's not harsh. It's not physical hitting or, so that the concept of discipline, of the word disciple, discipline is about being a follower, about living to the certain rules. So it's not about wagging finger and you must only do this or not that. So it's just really about relationship, I think. And also that sorry, I was just going to say that parents, what is I think really helpful to parents is to understand that children watch them, children observe.
Yeah.
And the parents can model being a parent, being a woman, being a man, or any other, so you might have families with 2 mums or families with 2 dads. So what is being modeled to the children? What are we learning? Children watch what we do and they know how they feel about what we do. So I think recognizing that is really, so parents have a responsibility to be a good role model.
Right. So Elaine, they watch everything we do. And then, and especially parents of maybe 1, 2, or more children than 2, they might start hearing things from parents where they say, oh, you love the other more than me, and what you just mentioned reminded me of something I heard Rudolf Dreikurs say. It's not so much about what what the parent believes about how much they love the child or what they feel. So I'd love to hear more from you, about how those beliefs are formed and what parents can learn there.
Well, yes, I think the one of the things that Adler really showed us is exactly how the beliefs are formed. Mm-hmm. So when we work with, for example, early recollections, so a child observes, so children can come to different conclusions in the same situation. So each child's perception, each child's understanding is equally valid. Mm-hmm. So that's the child's own, what we call private logic, your own understanding of what's going on around you. Mm-hmm. And those are formed really by sort of initially by trial and error, So the child might feel, so for example, say a child is on its own in a cot, a little child, 1.5 years old, is on its own, and it feels lonely, or maybe it's got a sore tummy, or maybe it's got a wet nappy, and it cries because it needs somebody to come. Well, if somebody comes quickly, the child will maybe think, okay, that's the way to go about things. I know that if I cry, somebody will come quickly, and if they come quickly and kindly, then I get my needs met and it's all fine. If that same child or another child in the same position cries and nobody comes, and it's left there sitting with a wet nappy or sitting in a bit of pain, because there was a school of thought a long time ago that if a child cried, you ignored it, you just left it cry until it cried itself out. Well, what conclusion does that child come to about other people, about themselves? They might think, oh, I'm not worth responding to, nobody cares about me, or people hate me, or I am alone in the world.
To fight for my own, right? Yeah.
Life is really unfair, or life is harsh. Therefore, I must just get on with it by myself. So these beliefs begin to be formed quite early on, and by trial and error, and also depending on the response of those around them. So it's a really interesting thing to observe. I don't want to say too much about early memories, but they are the birth order aspect is also really crucial in how a child perceives the world.
And maybe we can do a whole other session on early memories if the parents who watch us is interested. I had another thought there from a parent's point of view. So we know that from infancy, the day the child is born, they observe everything, like you said, and don't want to repeat what you already said. Isn't it the hardest thing for parents when a child can't really verbally express that yet? So therefore, parents may believe, oh, sure, the child, it doesn't really matter what I do, or not that the parent thinks that, but it's so hard, isn't it? That if the child, the 2-year-old, could only communicate that rather than having a tantrum or whatever we say, that those beliefs are being formed. Well,
Well, yes, and again, there is a belief, maybe not so much now, because I think some parenting has changed massively certainly in my lifetime. But there was a French saying, "Pas devant les enfants," which means not in front of the children.
Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So, meaning that the children will know nothing about the atmosphere between the two parents. But children, even although they can't verbalize it, they can feel. They feel the atmosphere. They understand what's going on. So for example, if two parents, they're not having an argument, but they're not speaking, and there's a frosty atmosphere, the child knows.
Yes.
So I think we must never assume that the child cannot understand. They understand probably firstly at a feeling level.
Right.
Even if they can't think about about things intellectually yet, because they're not fully formed. They're not fully formed until they're 21 or something. So, it takes time. But there's only really crucial. A lot of parents assume that their children don't pick things up, but they do. They do. They observe, yes, but they feel, and they come to conclusions, and sometimes not the most logical conclusion from an adult perspective, but from a child perspective, that works. Like the child crying, the purpose of the crying, and what happens when they cry, how people respond. So the early dynamics are really, really important, actually.
Yeah. And I always think of that example, let's say you're firstborn or you're a second child and a younger one comes along, and then the child observes, oh, this newborn gets so much attention, right? And then parents say that their older child falls back into more babyish behavior because they come to that conclusion that I will get attention, right? Or to get love here, I need attention.
Again, there are many different responses to that younger child arriving. So some eldest might feel dethroned. That's a word that we know and use a lot. They might feel, well, hang on, the spotlight's been on me all this time, and suddenly somebody else is more important than me. So what am I going to do about that? What do I, as that firstborn, do? So there might be several different responses. One, yes, might be, I'm going to be like a baby too, because if I'm like a baby, I'll get that attention. Another one might be, I'm going to really help my mummy, because if I'm a good girl or good boy, I will get good attention. Another one might be, I'm going to just do my thing. I'm going to ignore everyone and basically tell them all to get lost. So there are as many different responses as there are children. We cannot say this will always happen or that will always happen.
Yeah.
Adler himself said, and things can always be different.
And I love that. So it moves as well. And then, Elaine, before I get into my next question, there's so many questions in between, but this whole good girl, and especially mothers who I work with, that belief can be formed in the first few years. I need to be the good girl in order to belong, which is this big theme with Adler and Dreikhurst. I need to belong here. And then maybe you can say a little bit from your wisdom and experience on how then that belief is taken into adult life and never really questions until maybe we go into therapy or something big happens. And it's this underlying thing that we're not aware of.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I think what happens, people tend to come to therapy when their early strategies stop working.
Okay.
That's when they think, hang on, there's something not working here. This is not helping me. I need to find a different way. So I need to apply an adult perspective rather than a child perspective onto my way of managing life. So that's when I see people come to therapy. This doesn't work anymore. So there's so much theory. I'm just trying to think about what would be useful here. So we learn those tendencies early. So there's an Adlerian called Nira Kfir, who was based in Israel. She did a lot of work on what she calls the priorities of lifestyle. So priority behaviors. So these are the go-to behaviors. So when we are confronted with an impasse, in her words, when we hit a brick wall or we go down a one-way street and we can't go any further, that's the impasse. She has formulated this idea of there are what she sees as 4 priority behaviors. And these behaviors will be fed by our early understanding, by our early personality formation, if you like. So she sees one as the first one is superiority. Superiority. So that comes from the belief that I must be better than everyone else. There's a certain amount of perfectionism possibly in there, but I must be better. I must overdo. I must overwork. I must push myself. And what the impasse with that is meaninglessness. So, well, if I'm not the best, there's no point. I'm meaningless. I feel meaningless. Life feels meaningless. So that's the first one. Another response from a child is that I must avoid humiliation. So when I work with adults and children, very often some of the early memories might have humiliation. For example, in a classroom when you were 5, having a peeing in your pants, the humiliation of that,
Yes.
of everybody else, and really awful. And you might have been told off by the teacher, all of those kinds of things. So the impasse is humiliation. In order to avoid humiliation, I must be really in control.
That's right. That's my one. I'm very familiar with that one.
I know that one well. So I must be in control, because the alternate, if I'm not in control, I can be humiliated and feel really bad. Yeah. The third one that she developed was the impasse was rejection. If I'm rejected, I can't live. It's really difficult. And so what I must do is please everyone in order to avoid rejection. So sometimes a firstborn might go into fear rejection, because there's the other one over there. The spotlight's moved. So, what about me? So therefore I will become mummy's little helper. I will please. And that becomes a strategy. Then the final one that Nira Kfir kind of alluded to was avoidance. She called it avoidance, and some people add comfort seeking. So that is complete discouragement. I can't do any of this. It's all too stressful. At all costs, I must avoid stress. Okay, so stress is too much. I don't feel up to it. I'm not strong enough. I don't have the skills. And so the stress is the impasse for that. I must avoid stress at all costs by staying comfortable, by never engaging with life, by maybe sleeping a lot, sometimes addiction, sometimes alcohol. It's really fascinating. So those are dynamics that she's observed. Okay, and we all can do all of those things, but there is always one main one, and that's why she called it priority. That's our first go-to. That's so right. It's just fascinating, and to see how that links with the early recollections as well. Yeah. It's really interesting.
Absolutely. And I thank you so much for mentioning this in positive discipline, and you're familiar with that as well. I might link, there's a book that she wrote, right? I might link that in the description below. We have like these parcels, 4 parcels, and we say, imagine like the delivery guy brings them, and then it has these 4 words on it, the superiority, humiliation, rejection, and avoidance. And which is the one that you would not want to deal with at all? And that gives us a good indication where we go to when we're stressed. And we don't say that this is any kind of labeling, but it really opens parents it kind of gives them an idea about their own coping mechanisms and strategies, right? It is highly interesting. And
it's I find it incredibly useful. And it's what was the word? I was going to say trigger, but it's not really but it is. It feels like a trigger. It's a very quick flash of something that comes up when we feel when we hit our impasse.
Yeah.
So it's very strong, very, very strong. And actually, I don't think it ever really goes away.
That's what the perfectionists want to hear, right?
We become aware of it, and we might be able to slow it down and develop some strategies and encourage ourselves in a different path. But the impasse never goes away.
Yeah. And I don't know how you explain it, Elaine. Maybe you can elaborate. How we do it is that it comes with not only kind of the more liability side, but it also has assets, right? So somebody who like you say, goes for that control thinks mistakenly that this is the way to cope. Our kind of box, let's say it, if we say it that way, is that it brings also the strength of maybe being very organized or wanting to just really everyone to contribute, and having those kind of skills as well.
Yeah, absolutely. They all have assets. They all have positive sides to the behaviors. So, for example, for superiority, it can be a good leader. It can be someone who really wants to explore meaning and to bring meaning to things. They can be very, able to bring others in as well, to help others cooperate. Yeah. For control, yes, very organized, good business people, really, really helpful to be, they dot the I's and cross the T's, and then for the pleasing, well, to be someone to please you is such a lovely thing, for someone to do something kind for you. It's all of these behaviors, it's when we exaggerate them, it's when we do them too much that they become problematic. And the same with avoidance and comfort. They can be the homemakers, they can be people who really understand that other people need comfort too. I've got loads of examples I can give of relationships between my own superiority and people with different, which I won't go into now because they can go on forever. But, there's something, the other thing to think of is in relationship. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in a couple or in a parental relationship, what are the priorities? How do they work together? How do they work against each other?
Yeah.
So, and so again, I've had lots of relationships, working relationships that have gone well with people of different priorities, and also with clients. If mine is superiority, my go-to is to create meaning and to all of that, but also to be the best I can be. There was a time when I had to be better than others, and if I wasn't, I was absolutely devastated. So learning to manage that one. But, if my client is pleasing, really wants to please me, they might always say yes to what I might formulate and say, oh, I'm wondering if that could be the case. And they might always say yes, even if it's not, because they want me to approve of them, and they don't want to contradict me, or they don't want to say, no, that's not it. Yeah. So if a client is using control priority, they might wrestle with me and say, no, you haven't got it. No, that's not me at all. Yeah. And in my gut, I know it is, but they won't let go of that. And it's the same with avoidance. Interestingly enough, I don't see as many avoidant clients as I do of the others.
That brings me to a question that I just thought of digging with the birth order. Did you ever observe that like an eldest, a middle child, or a youngest has a tendency, I'm just making this up, but maybe does an eldest, are they maybe more to the superiority side and a second born to control, or is that not really there, and we can talk about something else when it comes to birth order?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It depends on the decisions the child made and the circumstances, the family dynamics, the family values, all of those things that you know about. The atmosphere. What was the atmosphere? How did they feel within the atmosphere? How did they see themselves? So there are not necessarily tendencies that an eldest will be into superiority. That happens to be mine. And there are other reasons to just being an eldest. There are other reasons for that.
What do you mean other reasons?
Example, some interactions with my parents, with my mother in particular.
Okay, right. That's what you mean. Okay.
There's the early memories that went back to childhood, things around school, around being, you should know better, so that led me to strive to be better, to be more, to find value through being the best or better.
Right. Yeah.
Some of those were not cause, but there were decisions I made when, I remember being told that 99% in a test was not enough. Mm-hmm. When are you going to get 100? So what decisions did I make then? I could say, well, okay, I need to get 110 to get my mother's approval, or I'm just going to stop trying.
Yes. And what did you choose, Elaine?
Guess what? Chose the 110. And they're all hard. All the impasses are hard, but yes,
they are.
It's so yeah. We make decisions. It's not a cause and effect.
Yes, that's right. That's the difference, right, with Adler, and that it's goal driven. And we look at what is that question you always ask, Elaine, to help us with the goal?
What's the purpose? What's the
Yeah,
purpose of this behavior? What's the
purpose.
purpose of this
That's right.
feeling?
Right.
What's the purpose of this illness? What is it doing for me?
Yeah.
How am I? Because there is some reason. It's that mistaken goal of Dreykus. He described the mistaken goal. How is that helping me?
Yeah, absolutely. I I want to hold that thought of the mistaken goal and Drykers. I do need to open the door for the cat and the mistakes. I forgot to leave the door and the window open for him to go out. Yeah, I would like to talk about the purpose a little bit, the purpose of our behavior.
It's all subjective. It's not objective. And if you do this, therefore that will happen. It's not. It's if I think this, my own interpretation, my own meaning will be put onto events, to atmospheres, to feelings. And the child does that very, very early on.
Mm-hmm. Their own interpretation of this person does that, and therefore I must, right, to belong here. I would like to go back into birth order with you, Elaine, and you being a firstborn, I am the secondborn, so I have an older sister, 5 years older, a younger brother, 5 years younger. And so I'd like to share a little bit with parents how it helps them. Every parent came somewhere in the birth order, even if they're an only child. And when I do these activities with parents, what I do in my courses is I get like a group of eldest together in a group, and the only children in their group, and the middle and the youngest. And it is fascinating. Parents love that when they find out a little bit more about themselves, and you've probably done something similar. And isn't it just it's such a revelation for like eldest in a group to hear that they were all very similar, not to stereotype, but an eldest child, their parents were first-time parents, and they had to be the first ones to try and go to the disco at a certain age, and they always share that, and how they found it maybe unfair that the younger didn't have to fight so hard. And every child and every group then has their experiences. The middle children tend to say, well, we became very independent. That was a good thing, we weren't maybe raised as conservative. And so we could go on and on about this, about the youngest being called the baby when they walk into a family gathering at the age of 40, right? What do you share with parents, how it helps them to, on the one hand, get some knowledge about those stereotypes, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the birth order traits or the descriptions of each birth position are more tendencies,
yes,
rather, or choices,
mm-hmm.
or preferences. Not necessarily this is what a firstborn will be like, or this is what a middle child will be like, but they are possibilities. Mm-hmm. So they're not set in stone. And one thing to say really is that Adler emphasized what he called the psychological birth order, which is not the same as a chronological birth order.
Right.
So the chronological is the dates. So I was born in 1957, my sister was born in 1958, my other sister in 1960. That's the chronological. Mm-hmm. But the psychological is how I see myself. So do I see myself as an eldest? So there are children, for example, I've worked with in therapy with adults or children who have said they might be second born, but they've had to take up the role of the eldest because the eldest didn't want to do it, or the eldest maybe had been ill or died. So I've had to step up. So my place, my birth order can change. My perception of my birth order can change. Right. So the chronological doesn't change, but my perception and how I carry out, if you like, the position can be different. So there are tendencies, and I'll just run through a couple if it's helpful.
Oh, thank you.
The birth positions. So the firstborn child, as you said so well, they're given they're the practice child. The parents are having a go, they're trying, they've never done this before, and it's they're learning. But also all the attention is focused on that first child because it's the miracle child. Oh my goodness me, look at this. Look at what we've done here. Oh, wow, there's this baby and oh, goo, it can speak and it can crawl. And isn't it wonderful? So the child has got all of that coming its way. And then when the second child comes along, the first child is dethroned. And I think that's such a powerful word. So I'm not on the throne. I'm not on that pedestal anymore. I'm not in the spotlight. I just think of it, I like to think of it as a spotlight. The spotlight has gone over there. So I'm sat here on my own in the dark. And all the attention now is going to that second miracle child. Yeah. So I feel dethroned. So my response to that might be that I have to constantly be ahead. I am a step ahead. And the second child might well feel they are trying to catch up. So the second child might never catch up because there is an age difference. The firstborn has had all those experiences, has had, and so the second child is running to catch up. The first child is watching its back, is going, oh God, where is that child? It's horrible. I hate it. Go away. So, or maybe, oh, I love you. It's so nice to have a little, it's so lovely to have a little brother or sister. It could be all kinds of responses. And the second child doesn't, so very often becomes quite ambitious because they're overstretching themselves. They want to catch up. They want to be better than the first child because they know that being that bit older gets some kind of kudos. So possibly they struggle to be equal to the older child. Then maybe another child comes along, a third child. So the second child then becomes a middle child. Do you see how it changes? So then suddenly I'm in the middle and the attention was, well, not on me anymore. It's on that younger one, but I'm between. So somebody's chasing and snapping at my heels, but also I'm snapping at somebody else's heels. So middle children often feel really that they don't have a place. Sometimes they feel invisible. Sometimes they think, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. How do I get recognition? Sometimes they might just give up. They might just say, oh, well, there's no point in trying because he's way ahead of me and she's snapping at my heels. So I'll just sit here and wait and see what happens. So, it varies massively. The other thing that is often said about middle children is that they are very often peacekeepers. They're mediators. They want things to be to go well. They want to try and fit in. They want to belong. They might be very sensitive to justice. It's unfair. He's so much better than me, and what about justice? We should all be the same. This is not right. So you can see those different choices that children might make. And then the youngest. So the youngest child will never be dethroned.
I've never heard that sentence put like that. It's so true. Never be dethroned.
There's nobody coming to snap at my heels. So it's just me. And so very often the younger child will be babied by the other people, by the other children, by the parents. You can't possibly do this. They might be pampered. They might be spoiled. We don't expect much of you because you're so little. You can't really do very much. But also they might just also decide for themselves they're not capable, they can't do any of it. So not only do other people think that, but maybe they begin to believe that. So it's interesting with younger children, but it's not set in stone. I'm thinking my own family. My youngest brother, who's 9 years younger than me, he's a director of a charity that looks after children, not adoption and fostering charity.
Right.
And they run children's homes and all of that. And he's incredibly wanting people, to thrive and to become themselves. And he really gets that sense of having to look around and there's lots of other people. So he really gets that.
And did you say he's the youngest?
He's the youngest. He's 9 years younger than me. Yeah. So he's really built something. But initially, it took him a while to find his path. Yeah. Because he was quite happy. He was a DJ when he was a teenager. He was just quite happy going and playing records and records in the old days. Quite happy.
Very fun-loving, aren't they? The youngest always say we're quite fun-loving, charming, we're risk-takers.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But he's now very, very social. He coaches in football. He used to love playing football. So, he loved being a goalie, being the one that really kind of wanted to be. He was the goalie. He could save things, so it's really interesting. So it's very, very fascinating that. And the other thing I wanted to touch on was a couple of things. One about blended families.
Very, very, yeah.
So I see and have seen, especially when I was working in school, that children were quite, I wouldn't say damaged, but challenged.
Yeah.
By becoming part of a blended family. So if you imagine somebody's the youngest, and then another family comes along where the child is also a youngest, or might even be younger than that child, everything changes. The whole dynamic changes. Somebody might have been an eldest and had a certain amount of power in a way, and kudos and responsibility. Somebody else comes in that's older than them, or that's also an eldest, but maybe even younger than them. It does people's head in. They can't. So unless it's handled very well by the parents and the children are allowed to find their place naturally, it's a very, very tough thing. The majority, I would say, of children that I worked with in school, most of them were from blended families that caused them difficulties. And then the mother doesn't love me anymore, or the father, he's not my dad, he shouldn't be telling me what to do, and you're not my mom. And they might get on very well with their foster or their step siblings, but they might not. And also the relationships might change several times in a child's early life. So they have to constantly be adapting, and so they feel very uncertain, very insecure quite often. Or they go into complete digging their heels in, and no way, you can get lost. You're not going to tell me what to do. So again, it's that subjective response to the situation that's interesting, and how they find a way to handle themselves. And the other thing I was going to touch on was gaps in families, which are also important, because what can happen is that you create a new birth order. So I was just thinking about what you were saying about being the middle child, 5 years older and 5 years younger. So Adler said that if there was a 5 or more age gap, that you effectively are in a different birth order. So it could be that each of you saw themselves as an only, for example.
Interesting.
Yeah. Or you say you're a middle child. That's your perception of it. Yeah. But in another family with those gaps, they might each say, well, I didn't really have anything, because when I was born, they were off at school. So I had my parents all to myself as a middle child. And then when I went to school, the younger child was born. So that child had the parents all to themselves during school hours, obviously. So it's just fascinating how it's our own perception of the situation that is to be listened to, rather than saying you are a middle child, therefore. It's not that at all. It's how you saw yourself.
That is, when I heard this for the first time last 2 years now, early 2025 recording this, I found that so fascinating. And not only for me did I question, am I a middle child, or am I maybe looking at myself like an eldest to my younger sibling? It opened my eyes parenting my own children, because my daughter, she's so interested in this, she's now 14, and I shared that with her, that it's not just the chronological, it's the psychological. And then we discovered that I have 2 children, could she maybe have seen herself as an only child, even though she has a younger brother? And she thought that was so fascinating, because at her young age, she was able to see that there were these tendencies. And And it's almost like, I don't know if the term spitting in someone's soup fits here, but something changed since she had that awareness. And I have a feeling that my two children are becoming a little bit closer since then, her learning this. What do you think?
Well, yes. I mean, people, like we've been saying, people can change their perception depending on what they're experiencing and feeling. So,
yeah,
you know, I'm an eldest. I'm actually the eldest in my entire family on my mother's side, because there are no older people left. It's just me. I'm the eldest of them all,
right.
which is quite an interesting thought. It doesn't sit with me very often, but occasionally I think, oh my goodness me, there's nobody above me. You know, there's nobody older.
Mm.
And I suppose I could start thinking of myself as a matriarch or something like that, but I don't feel it in myself. I just feel the same as I always felt. But also thinking about those groupings in families, you know, so using my own family as a sibling group as an example. So 3 girls came very quickly, one after the other, 18 months between each of us. So 3 years between me and my younger sister, 18 months between me and my middle sister. Then there was a gap of 4 years. And my first brother was born when I was 7.
Mm-hmm.
And my second brother was born when I was 9. So the 2 boys have just a 2-year gap between them. But there is that gap in between.
Mm-hmm.
And so my first brother, the oldest of my 2 brothers, I think sees himself as, you know, the head of the family. Right. He's the oldest boy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's the oldest boy. You know, and my younger sister could see herself as a youngest of that group, yes, or as a middle child.
Yeah. Have you ever asked?
Not recently, no, but there are 3 middle children. So I'm the eldest and my brother's the youngest. And then there are 3 middle children, but they could see themselves as not necessarily middle children. They could be a youngest or an eldest of that in between. So the eldest of the 2 boys, the youngest of the girls. The youngest boy is the youngest of us all. I'm the eldest of everyone. So it's just really interesting how people might change or wish to explore things differently rather than chronologically.
Yeah, it is so helpful, isn't it? To look into.
Amazing, yeah.
It is amazing. And I remember the nights when I had the parenting courses still in my home here. It was, parents never wanted to leave. There is so much to talk about. They could sit all night, right? And yes, explore those dynamics. And it is so interesting. And on that topic, I wonder if this, before I ask my last question, I want to invite the parent who watches this and caregivers to leave us a comment, you know, below, to see maybe what you, the parent who sees this, observed, what beliefs you formed about your position in that birth order, or maybe about your own children, and let us know, or even questions that come up. You know, I'd love to explore that deeper. There's so much to say.
I was just also thinking that in terms of working with parents is the parent's own birth order and the impact that has on them as a parent in relationships. So if you have a parent who's who was an only growing up, and they have an only child, how is that dynamic? Or if it's a parent who grew up as an only, suddenly has lots of children, or 2 or more, you know, how is it to be a parent who was an only? How do you understand those dynamics? If you're a parent who was an eldest, and how do you relate to your eldest child?
Absolutely.
Was it the same or was it different? As an eldest, how do you relate to your youngest child? Or as an eldest, how do you relate to your only child? These are all dynamics that I think are worth looking at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so subtle, isn't it? And that's what then children tend to point out, you know, you're like this and this with them. And then the parent becomes maybe aware, well, I mean, because I was the baby in the family, and, you know, yeah, so fascinating. Yeah.
Yes, it's endlessly fascinating. And if I was the baby in my family, how do I step up to be a parent, to take that responsibility? You know, and onlys may be very social. Onlys may have lots of cousins and friends, and they may find a place within a group, or they may be on their own and they rule the roost. You know, I have clients who are onlys who are absolutely unaware of other people and not interested in other people.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing. So
Yeah.
it's so subjective. It's all the time. It's how am I seeing this? And what can I do about this?
Yes, that's right. That's this whole, how did you say earlier? I didn't write it down, but we can change our perspective. And that's the beauty, isn't it?
Yeah.
My personal example is I was the middle child. I was labeled the problem child. And so I grew up with this whole, oh, I'm such a victim, don't have the benefits of the eldest and not spoiled like the youngest, until I sat down with my siblings in my 30s and we all allowed each other to say what it was like from our perspective. And it was fascinating to change my perspective and snap out of the I'm the victim here and I never got the attention that the others got. And speaking of attention, I could speak with you all day about this, Elaine. So much more comes up when we speak. I'd love to explore a little bit of there's so many challenges parents have when children fight, and we have one good idea of why children fight. And I say a lot that it's not, as a parent, our job isn't really to force our children, they have to love each other, but we can do a lot that they respect each other. And I would love your thoughts on that, how it maybe worked in your own family, or how you work with parents who have these challenges.
Yes, it's interesting because coming back to Dreyfus and Adler, is their suggestion, if you like, their teaching us is to not intervene. Let the children manage it for themselves.
Right.
Because if as a parent we intervene, there will be one who might feel vindicated and the other who feels it's not fair. So letting the children find their own level. And obviously we don't want them to kill each other or hurt each other, but really it's a question of, but also teaching them, like you did with your siblings. That was so wonderful and took so much courage. Let's look at this. Let's see what's happening here. What is this fight really about? It's not that you're not allowed to fight, but we need to understand what the goal of the fighting is.
Wow.
So do you want to be the boss? Do you want to not be the youngest? Or do you want to get more attention because you think the youngest gets more attention? So it's really understanding those mistaken goals. Stryker's phrase, those mistaken goals.
Right.
In everything we do is goal directed.
Yes.
And Adler understood that. We have a purpose for everything. So can you resolve your dispute without fighting? How can we resolve this? Let's help each other. How can we do this as a parent? So what are you looking for? Do you feel, oh, well, I think you hate me, mum, or whoever, you're always giving him what he wants and you never give me, that always never stuff.
Yeah.
Is that really true? Okay, let's talk about it. Come on, give me an example of when you got some good attention. Give me an example of when you didn't get good attention. Let's see how we can resolve it. So it's about really, and that's one way to teach respect, I think, is to recognize that the other also has a point and accept that.
Right. That empathy, isn't it? To want to hear. And Riker's always said, but not in the heat of the moment. Right?
Yes.
What he calls making time for training has to come at a very different time. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Walk away. Let them get on with it.
Yeah.
As I say, as long as they don't get the carving knives out and attack each other, then let them get on with it,
Yeah.
And because whatever we do as a parent in that situation, it's going to feel to the child that we might favor one or the other. So, but also they have to come to their level. They have to come work with their dynamic and figure it out. And yes, so then you can't reason in the moment. You just absolutely can't.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this when everybody's a bit quieter, when everybody's calm, or let's talk about this when you're not fighting. Let's sit down. Let's make a time where we can sit down and talk about this. The family meeting, absolutely crucial, so important. So let's talk about this in a family meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the meantime, let's agree that we're not going to actually fight. We just might say a couple of words or be able to say how we feel, but we're not going to fight about it. And again, just thinking on the hoof, the priority behaviors will come into it. Does a child want to be better than? Does a child want to win? Does a child want to please and feel that he's being rejected, he or she? Does a child want to avoid stress?
Right. That's right.
So, and what's the competition between siblings? How do they compete? There's a really lovely book by Calvin Armading.
I'm going to put that down. They're Adlerians as well, right?
Yes, called The Cooperative Family.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful book, well worth reading. So it's about many different types of competition in families. So competition between siblings. How do we compete with each other? So, for example, if I was actually quite bright academically, so how did my siblings compete? They didn't. They didn't.
Yeah.
But not till later. When they were older, they did, but not at school. They just, I don't know what they thought, if they thought they needed to catch up or they just weren't interested. I don't know, actually. We haven't really talked about that. But I noticed it. So competition between siblings, competition between parents. How do the two parents compete? Whose needs come first? You know, it's wonderful. Competition between oh gosh, there's several chapters, lots of chapters that are really, really worth looking in terms of parenting. So how did you compete with your own siblings? How do my children compete with each other? What are they looking for? How can we resolve that competition? How can we turn it into cooperation? And the same thing with parents, you know. You might have a very strict parent who has lots of rules. It can only be like this. And then they might be with someone who's going, oh, come on, let them be, they're fine. So who wins? Who becomes the dominant parent? Is it the one with the rules or is it the one with the laissez-faire attitude? It's just amazing. So a book well worth reading, and it's got lots of case studies and it's really, really helpful. Finding horizontal relationships rather than inferiority, superiority.
For those who haven't heard this, maybe in a different video on my channel, would you maybe as a final thing, and we could talk all day, and maybe just explain a little bit what Adler meant by that, vertical and horizontal relationships?
Yeah, well, vertical. So Adler understood that we, from the very beginning in our lives, we strive to move away from inferiority feelings. And the direction of travel is towards superiority. So he calls it, I don't know if Adler called it or other Adlerians coming after called it the greasy pole, the slippery pole. It's very hard to do that climb up because we slip back again.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah? So that slippery pole is really interesting. So how do we find, some people don't like the word superiority. Some people call it significance, which is a good word, but it softens it, I think. So how do we move away from inferiority to superiority? And the healthy relationship is not vertical, not between superiority and inferiority, it's horizontal. That we're all on the same plane, we're all on the same level. That's where we can relate to each other without going up and down all the time.
That's right.
And also just a very quick thing on inferiority in terms of it's a central part of Adler's theory, actually, that humans are born inferior. We have a sense, even as babies, of our own inferiority. If you look at nature, most animals in nature can function from the minute they're born. Most, not all, but most. Okay? Human babies can't do anything much for themselves until they're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then they begin to be able to dress themselves, they learn, but they still can't live on their own. They can't go and hunt. They can't find food in the shrubs. You know, they might learn about plants, but do you see what I mean? Whereas in the animal world, I live in Wales, surrounded by sheep. The lambs are born and they shake themselves off and they're off. You know, and yes, they have their mother's milk, but they also can jump and run and play and, you know, and if you watch any animal being born, most animals, not all, certainly not the ape families, but a lot of animals just get up and get on with it, whereas humans can't. It's not that they don't, but they can't. So that inferiority, Adler believed, was built in.
Okay.
And again, when you come to birth order, as that little second child, you might look at your older sibling and think, well, they can walk and talk and run, and I can't. I can just sit here and wait for someone to change my nappy, and I can go goo goo, or I can cry, and I can smile, and I can create relationships in that way by looking at facial expressions of my parent and my mother. It's, again, that's a whole massive other topic. There's been lots of research on how mother and child and father and child develop their bond. A lot of it through facial expressions and through hearing and reproducing what they hear.
Right.
So there's a whole other.
It's a whole other hour, Elaine. And isn't it so interesting? Like from that second born perspective, and this is what my sister shared with me. How like I wanted to share a bit of vulnerability here. Like I wanted to be so much like her when I was a young teenager. I stole her socks and put them on so I could be a bit more like this older sister who was like my hero, and how annoyed she was, and this whole inferiority. And I think one big takeaway is this whole comparing. We were girls, we were compared a lot to each other, so then to a firstborn, I'm just trying right now while I'm saying this, trying to see it from her perspective. If an older, maybe daughter is compared to one who's 5 years younger, like that difference, how does that firstborn feel? And the secondborn, like you said, my sister could do everything 5 years before me, and to watch that and be compared to that, it's very, very hard for both, not only the younger sibling, right?
Absolutely. Well, I think of that idea of running to catch up, snapping at, the younger one snapping at my heels as the eldest, and then the older one, I'm not in that position. I never have been, actually, as the first child in my family, the first grandchild. So, I've always been the one at the end point, if you like. But having people snapping at your heels, I remember that infuriated me as a child, as a young person and a child, having to look after, I could go on, I have so many examples, but having to look after and babysit the younger ones when I wanted to have my life, and I was tethered to these young children, and I really didn't want that role.
Yes.
Where am I? And I did, one thing my parents did do for me was that I always had my own room. I never had to share a room. My two sisters shared a room, but I didn't. So they recognized something there about, you need your own space, which I really appreciated, actually.
A privilege of the eldest. Yes.
Yes, but we were always taught to share and share alike, and that's one of my difficulties in my current relationship. My husband was an only,
right,
and so he doesn't know how to share. So we have, I can divide things into 5 because I was the eldest. I can divide a cake into 5 equal portions. And if he has something to divide into 2, there's always a slightly bigger portion, which he takes. It drives me insane. We've been together 47 years and it still makes me want to scream. They're not the same. They're not equal.
That reminds me, and we did this yesterday. We made this Austrian dish, my son and myself, for the family, called Kaiserschmarrn. It's something that do you know this dish?
I know. No, I don't actually know.
It translates as the emperor's nonsense. It's completely out of off topic, but it was very funny. But we made this together. It's a bit like pancake, but different. And what we do in an activity in positive discipline is that we say, if there are siblings and they don't want to share, and a lot of people know this now, but it works so well. Maybe try it with Matthew. We say one cuts or divides it, and the other one chooses. And we've been doing this since they were young, and it works so well.
I might try that.
Yes.
So it's just so funny. Yeah.
To wrap it up, I absolutely love our chat, Elaine, and we would welcome all comments on the topic. I mean, there's so much to talk about. To maybe expand it for in the summer or later in the year, you know. If anyone is interested in maybe exploring Adler's teachings a bit more, you know, you had this word of, if somebody maybe is a psychotherapist already and they try to, how did you say, like a
conversion. Well, we call it a conversion course. So it's not that we're trying to convert people into Adlerians. We want them to be able to convert some of their skills to learn about Adlerian skills, which can be incredibly useful, because there are many approaches out there who look at early childhood, but not in this way.
Yes,
they just look at early childhood. What was it like for you? But they don't look at the dynamics and the interactions. And there's lots of work around early memories, around dreams, around various therapeutic concepts that are Adlerian that don't exist anywhere else. So it's a very useful course, very interesting course, but also complete beginners will I know gain something from it. So this is the online course. I think I said 3rd of March. Is that the date I gave?
I wrote 3rd of March, yeah. And you said you had a Facebook link. I might link it below, and we'll have a chat offline if I maybe add your email address or whatever way people can reach out if they have questions to take part. And there's an introduction to Adlerian psychology coming up, right, as well.
And that is the course that I'm talking about.
That is the same. Okay, right. Yeah. Okay. And anything else you would like to share before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think I'm aware of my tendency to ramble and go off on tangents, but I think it's all one theory. It's a unified theory, so it all links in. So apologies if you're thinking, where is she going now? What is she talking about? But I'm hoping that you'll see how it all kind of fits together.
And I think you mentioned her sometimes, Betty Lou Bettner. You're familiar with her as well, right? And she explains the Adlerian approach and holism, like the pieces of the jigsaw. Are you familiar with this analogy? Yeah. And especially when it comes to how much our children, they need to contribute, is if they don't have that, then it's almost like a piece missing of the jigsaw, and we need everything to be the whole picture. I love that. It's such a simple way and yet deep to explain Adler and what he meant. And this whole moving one, let's say you have the complete jigsaw and moving one piece, how that impacts the whole, right?
That's absolutely, that holism is really, I mean, again, we could do a week on Adlerian
holism its own, yeah.
But what Betty Lou Bettner talks about, Adler described as social interest. So that's Adler's fundamental notion, fundamental understanding of mental health is social interest, which is about contribution, how we contribute to our group, to our family, to our relationship with one another, to our community, to our work, to the world, and to ourselves. So that the idea of social interest, Gemeinschaftsgefühl in German, the feeling of togetherness, the feeling of belonging, contribution. There isn't one word for that in English, but it's quite a big word. So that's the fundamental part of all of this. From when we're born is to understand how we contribute and how we belong. And then we feel we can handle life.
That's it. And isn't it, did you say this to me, that we cannot kind of determine someone's mental health based on their interest in the social interest of others, right?
Yes. And it's a bit like a kind of figure of 8, you know, how does if I feel, say, for example, depressed, if I feel depressed, I'm not really interested in getting out there. I'm not interested in contributing. I'm really self-focused. I'm really discouraged. I'm really not wanting to. So does that come first, or does the fact that I've isolated myself because of maybe circumstances at work or in the family contribute to my feeling depressed? So either way, the lack of wanting to become, to be a contributing member of the group, of society, of the world, damages our mental health.
Yeah.
Or if our mental health is already damaged, we find it difficult to contribute. So it goes in both directions.
And that
what we see,
go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, what we see through therapy is the social interest increasing.
Yeah. I think everyone who's done therapy can attribute to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to go rambling on now about how I grew up in a system that kind of, it doesn't mean either that our own individual needs don't matter anymore, and it's all about the greater good, because that doesn't work. But like you said throughout our conversation, it's all about relationship, being in relationship with the other and ourselves, right? And this finding this golden balance. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much, Elaine. I'm going to leave it here, and we'll invite the viewer to comment and ask questions, and maybe start a next conversation on a different topic. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's been really...
If you enjoyed this podcast and maybe even heard something that was new to you, it would really help me if you left me a comment below. Thank you for listening until the end. And there is one question you might ask yourself, which Elaine referred to. How should a parent react if the carving knives came out? So I have created a video which I'm going to leave up here, a very brief script for you where you can put what you just heard into action. Thank you very much.